Welcome to this week's episode of Presence. I'm very excited for the guest on today, President of CSU Bakersfield, Dr. Lynnette Zelenzy. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Cindy. It's so wonderful to be with you. I'm honored to be a guest today.
Thank you. I am absolutely thrilled to have you with us today. So that our audience knows a little bit more about you, I'd like to say a couple of highlights. Lynnette has been part of the CSU system in a professional capacity for 30 years. She has a PhD in applied psychology, has been a visiting scholar at many institutions, and has served in the capacity of professor, dean, associate provost, and now president. It's quite a legacy that you have created through your leadership and your scholarship. Lynnette, can you tell us about yourself beyond those highlights mentioned?
Well, absolutely. Because it wasn't a linear path. It looks on paper as if it were linear, but it wasn't. So the first thing you should know about me is I was an early high school graduate. I was a child that was the daughter of an aerospace engineer. And so my young life was moving from rocket town to rocket town, very nomadic, but very interesting. So my dad worked on all of the Apollo missions. He was involved and engaged in reentry into the atmosphere. So I saw lots of history related to aerospace and have lived in lots of unusual places. So one of the things that's important to know about me is that I also have been in the CSU since 1974. I went to Humboldt State, and as you think about that, that's almost 50 years ago. I've been in the CSU my entire professional career. The other thing that's important to note is that I got my PhD very late. I was in my 40s when I went back to get a PhD in applied social psychology. I
Mm.
taught with my master's degree at Fresno State for 10 years in the psychology department while I was raising my three young children, along with my husband, who was also an academic at Fresno State. So I came into leadership at a very late stage, some would say, of my life, and I've been running ever since. That's a bit about my background. And I look at my childhood. Many years I was in two schools. The number of schools I've been in is double digits. I look at that actually as a gift, something that has been important in sharing with others, because I didn't choose it for my own children, but I do see it as making me a more flexible person
Mm.
and a person that can really adapt to other cultures and other places very, very quickly. That's a
Wow.
little bit about my background, other than what it looks like on paper.
Wow, I love that you share that because I think it inspires us and it gives some of us that are a little bit older hope, saying, you know what? Lynnette didn't get her PhD until her 40s, and look at where she's at now. If she did it, I can do it. So
Oh,
there's
that's
certainly that element of, yeah, it's never too late.
and so many people say, "Oh, I can't do that because I have other responsibilities." But literally, my youngest child was an infant when I went back, and I had to relocate. So my children had to stay in Fresno, and I had to figure out a way to get to Los Angeles to get my PhD. There were no PhDs to be had in Fresno. I'm very grateful for the people that supported me during that time, including my husband who made it work, but also my children who were very resilient during that as young
Mhm.
children. And of course, they're very proud of me today.
Wow. I feel proud listening to this story. And I think there's something quite beautiful to be said about that experience in terms of the human experience of finding ways to be resilient and reach for our goals while still finding ways to connect to people, to have
Yes.
those relationships, especially when you're busy, when you're raising young children, where you're traveling back and forth between Fresno and Los Angeles to get that PhD and later continuing with your career. And I think that we can become jaded and say, I don't want to do anything with the world. Or we can say, you know what? Yes, it's a challenge, but isn't the world a great place where we can accomplish so many things? The reason I say that is because I remember when I first met you, when you were provost at Fresno State, you were very thoughtful and paid attention to everybody, not just myself, everybody. I noticed that obviously you had a very complex calendar back then as provost, and I'm sure your calendar is even more complex now as university president at Bakersfield. But when you were with people, you were in that moment, and that created a sense of human connection and also belonging. That's what I recall about your leadership. And I recall that you once invited me to lunch. We went to a Rotary Club meeting and we had a car ride. You drove us there and we talked about several books, including a book that you recommended, The Power of Habit. Do you still revisit that book?
Well, it's interesting. I've read so many books since that particular one that I recommended to you, but I do remember why I thought that that was an important book of the time. There were two things that really stood out to me in that book, and one was really preceding what we now know as growth mindset, right? So if
Mm-hmm.
you want to become excellent, if you want to be at the top of your game, it was going to take the habit of continual experience towards that. So I really appreciated that standpoint of, we all have the potential to grow and to change, but it will take investment and it will take the practice and exercise of repeating these habits so that it becomes a reflex. The other thing that I thought was important about that book is that many of us forget strengths that we have, strengths because of our experiences, but others you need to really recognize in yourself as that comes easy to me. So I'll give you an example. One of the things I love to do, speaking of the human connection, is often I'm asked to give remarks or speak about people. And this past month, I was asked by 3 of the 6 retiring presidents in the CSU to give remarks about them at their retirement dinner. And I write poems. I've been writing
Oh,
since I was a young child. And some of that might have been my own connection to myself as a very mobile child and, not exactly always having a best friend in my life. So I developed this very, very early on. But in writing about, other people and that human connection, that comes very easily to me. But if you think about it, it's because over the years, it was a safe place for me to be creative. And I developed it over the years. And now it's just really, really fun. So it's a strength of mine. It's a fun fact about President Zelensky. And I really was very touched to be asked to not only say something about my
mhm.
colleagues and friends, but they specifically asked me would I write a poem. That's one of the things I liked about the habit. I will say I have a habit of giving books to my cabinet prior to cabinet retreats. And we've had a number of outstanding books. Of recent, we've had The Empowered University by Freeman
Mm.
Hrabowski. We've read about anti-racism and so many others. But one of the books that I always recommend when someone wants to know what is the book that I have by my bedside, and that book is a very old book written in the 1930s. It's very dated, by Dale Carnegie. And that is How to Win Friends and Influence
I,
People.
that I have that book
Yes. All my children have it by their bedside.
right
And
here.
that's it. And why is that book so important? You need to get past the fact that it's got a lot of old, language. It's got stereotypes in it about gender, etc. But the chapter that I particularly think is important is how to connect to the human side of people
Yes.
by intentionally getting to know their names And so one of the things that people often will say about me is, how do you remember so many people's names? Well, that's one of the most important things you need to do as a leader, is do your best in remembering people's names. And the best way to learn how to do that is through Dale Carnegie's book. So I recommend that one almost every conversation when someone says, what's the book by your bedside? And it's that one. And as I mentioned, I really think it is important to connect to the human side of others by being intentional about knowing their name.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that people feel seen when you remember their names. They feel like I matter.
Yes.
And absolutely, yes, as a little side note, a girlfriend and we had a friend. Unfortunately, he passed several years ago. He was quite young. He passed because he obtained pneumonia. And the thing about our friend Paulo, he was exceedingly charismatic. He always knew everybody's names and really just had this larger than life type of personality. And we were wondering, how did he do it? One day, he gave away his secret, which was Dale Carnegie's book. And then we had this moment of, oh, that's what he's been doing all this time. So it's certainly a great book. And I'm so happy you brought it up. And I'm even happier I have it here in my library. Let me ask you another question. Why was becoming an educator and then later moving into a leadership role important to you?
It's interesting because I never, ever planned any of this. So it was not a 5-year-old child that said, I know one day I'll be a university president. In fact, when I was a lecturer at Fresno State, I'm not even sure I knew what a provost was, even though, interestingly, I would aspire to be the second in command and the chief academic officer at that university. It's more about, Cindy, opportunities that came my way.
Mm-hmm.
And I said yes. One thing that's important to note here is that the reason you say yes is one you need to reflect on. It's not to say yes to everything. It's to say yes to things that are interesting to you. You want to learn something. And so I was asked to go back and become a tenure track faculty member. I was quite happy teaching my back-to-back classes, raising my children, picking them up from school, snacks, homework, dinner, go back and do it the next day. That was a great life, very happy moments in my life. But I was asked by my department, and they gave me the support to go back and get my PhD because they needed me on the tenure track.
Mm-hmm.
Likewise, I was asked to be a department chair, a very large psychology department. I was asked to do that. I actually turned that down at least 2 times, maybe it was 3,
Wow.
because it's a very tough job, and
Mm-hmm.
I learned a lot from the experience of it, but it was tougher than I even thought it was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
But how did I keep my spirits up? Well, one of the things that I have learned how to do is that if I find myself in a tough spot, learning is the thing that I get the most joy out of, learning something. So at that time, I decided when I was a full professor and a department chair in psychology that I would go back and get my MBA. Again,
Mm-hmm.
I'm a re-entry graduate student. And what an odd scenario, right? You've got a professor of psychology in a graduate program where I know the professors who are teaching me. But that turned out to be absolutely a pivotal moment. Not only did it help me get outside of sort of the inner walls of conflict management and
Mm-hmm.
leading a very large family, which was the department, and it gave me opportunities where other people saw my skill set in a different way. So then I was invited to apply for the associate dean position in the business school. No one had gone from science and mathematics, where psychology was fitted, to a different school or college. But in fact, that sounded really interesting to me. It's like, I'd like to learn how to do that. And that was also a fantastic opportunity. I was so happy in that role. But lo and behold, the provost at the time, who then became a president, President William Covino, called me into his office and said, you're got an expertise in business, I see. Might you be able to build programs that could make money for Fresno State in extended education? I said, I think I could do that. I'd be interested. I said, yes. So off I went to extended education and was very successful in building new revenue generating programs for the university, which benefited faculty and faculty development, because that money that I was able to gain for him was invested back into faculty development. Likewise, when they needed someone to be on top of university accreditation, he asked me if I wanted to be the associate provost. And I hesitated about that one again. I was like, I'm really, really doing well as a dean of extended education. Every year I'm bringing in more revenue for you and for the university. And I love it. It's very creative to build a business, to build programs. And I loved it. It was a great use of creativity for me. But they needed me in that accreditation liaison officer role because we were going to be up for accreditation. So again, I thought, what a great thing to learn. That would be great for my work portfolio. Just said yes, right? And then again, wasn't really thinking about where was that going to take me at the time. It was about just developing my work portfolio. But in fact, now you can see that I have pretty long legacy working with the faculty, working on curriculum, technology, and it became obvious that I was well qualified to apply for the provost position, which again, I was invited to do at Fresno State. And very rare, you have an internal candidate that's going to get a position like that. But in this case, it was a really good fit. And I loved the job of provost.
I loved it when you were provost and I was there.
I loved it. And you're going to hear me say, in closing in today's remarks, all of this has been a joy. And that's the secret, right? Is that you need to find
Write
joy.
This down.
Not that every day is going to be easy, not that you won't be given major challenges that you will need to handle, but joy in the fact that you're the one in the seat. You have the experience, you have the good human-centered judgment, to move things forward. And it's fun. I love that role. I never would have thought I would have left that role. I was not looking for a presidency. But along the way, being a really strong provost, I became known at the system office and was the lead provost for the CSU in academic affairs. That was amazing, to hold that role among all the 23 provosts. But of course, that elevated me to a place where people were noticing, well, is this person ready to be a president? So I got actually quite a few nominations. I turned them down because for me, I really wanted to continue to serve in the Central Valley. It was a commitment my husband and I made early on in our professional careers. We knew we were hard workers. We knew we wanted to raise our family in a place where we didn't want them to get the impression that they had silver spoons in their mouth. We wanted them to see that, joy in life is about meaningful work every single day. And we knew if we stayed in the Central Valley, every single day would be meaningful because there's so much work to be done. So I didn't want to leave the Central Valley. But when the opportunity here at Bakersfield came up, and it was mentioned to me that I would be nominated for this presidential role, that was the first time I said, and I said it in about 30 seconds. Now that one is the one that I'd be most interested in because it kept me in the Central Valley. I could see the fit. Kern County is where aerospace history was made when Chuck Yeager broke the sound barrier. My dad was there that day. Also growing up in Texas for much of my life, when my dad was working on the Apollo missions as a contract engineer. I knew about oil. I had lots of folks in my family that worked in the oil industry, and it seemed just like a perfect fit. So I just said yes, right? When it felt like I could really get interested in learning about that. And that's the secret to, again, finding a place where you can thrive and be successful.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. As you can tell, I'm taking notes. I'm a note taker. There's a couple of things you said that just really stood out for me, and I think that our audience would appreciate. The first is yes. Even though there were times you said no, you said yes a lot to opportunities that came your way. There's a certain courageousness that comes with saying yes. I think that many times we say no out of fear, or we don't feel confident enough. We don't think that we have the skill set or that we can do it. Instead of questioning whether you could or couldn't do it, you said, oh, there might be something fun for me to learn, something interesting, a way for me to contribute. Let's say yes. And I think that that's a very different mindset. I think that that's the type of mindset that helps us be curious with the sense of awe and wonder and find that joy. I really appreciate those beautiful insights, because so many times we forget how important it is to say yes, but it's also important to say no when your spirit feels that it's a no.
I will say, and I think this is important for women to hear,
Mm-hmm.
at every point that I said yes, I was terrified. I want to point out that when I did my MBA, I did a thesis, and my thesis was on mentoring executive women leaders.
Mm.
And when I did my research literature review, I found some very fascinating things. I want to share that with you, Cindy, because there's differences in the way men and women approach this. What I found in the research literature, and it's very robust finding, is that men and women, and again, these are generalized aggregate findings from the research, but men and women approach opportunities very differently. And likely we've been nurtured in ways, and in my generation, certainly I can point back, to, standing back, right? But I point this out to give, in particular, women a little more bravery and a little more courage, because what the research will show is that when there's job description, right? Presidential job description, let's just say, and you look down the requirements and the preferences, right? Men will quickly look at it and go, oh, I'm a great fit for this. Mm-hmm. Women will go down this checklist very carefully and say, yes, yes, yes. Oh, I don't have that. I better wait. Mm-hmm. And they will talk themselves out of moving forward because I don't have that. And here's an example. I didn't do fundraising when I was provost at Fresno, yet I'm going to have to do that as a president, right? Mm-hmm. But I had earned a lot of money for the university through extended education. I had brought in millions of dollars in grants. And it turns out I was able to tell a story about, I actually know about diversified funding streams. And I'm also confident I can bring in philanthropy. Well, as it turns out, I've been excellent at that. I not only have brought in philanthropic gifts, but I was able to get an appropriation, a building here, the Energy Innovation Building in Bakersfield, which the governor gave us an appropriation, $83 million. And then grants under my watch. All this total is about $200 million.
Wow.
So in 5 years of work, it's been a great way to use my skill set in understanding, different ways of bringing in money to the university, not just one way, and being very successful at it. So I really want to give women courage. And that's why I share this every step of the way. I was so happy about it. I was so happy to get into a PhD program. Oh my goodness, I was burning to do that my whole life, but terrified. I'm going back. I'm going to be is the age of these other students' mothers. But I'm going to have to be in the same classroom, and I have to still find a way to be successful. Don't interpret "I'm terrified" as so afraid I need to say no.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because I can certainly tell you that I've done that in terms of looking at a job description, going down the list, check, check. Oh, no, I don't have that. Check. I don't have that one. Check, check. And just because I didn't have 2 out of 15, thought, oh, I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to be qualified. And sometimes we forget that it's a balance between qualifications, experience, but also aptitudes. Sometimes we sell ourselves short with not understanding what our aptitudes are. Once we start to pay more attention to our aptitudes, what we're strong at, what we're good at, we say, oh, I can learn that. And that's a different way of reframing things. And I'll just share with you, Lynnette, that when I decided to start this podcast, I was a bit overwhelmed. I was like, ooh, I don't know how to record a podcast, how to edit. And this is completely different than what I've done academically. The podcast did cause me to pause. And I said, you know what? No, if I was able to get a PhD and learn to do all of these other things, why can I not learn to record a podcast, edit it, and put it on different platforms? It's been, one of those endeavors where you start to see, okay, yeah, I can do that. I just have to give myself the opportunity to do that. And it's a very different way to look at life in terms of what we are capable of or not, but also based on gender. And sometimes we forget how much we internalize, particularly generationally. I see some young women who are millennials and Gen Zers certainly breaking more barriers than I did at their age, because they grew up with a different set of societal expectations as well as ideas on what women can and can't do versus my generation X type of programming that I was raised with. I don't know if that's the right word, but I certainly do see some differences between my generation and the generation that's following mine. But at the same time, I'm also grateful to your generation because you've broken ceilings for my generation. I would not be sitting here today interviewing you if you did not break all the ceilings that you did. And that's what inspires me, is when I see somebody doing what you're doing, saying, well, this person broke a ceiling. You were the first female president of CSU Bakersfield. That's a huge ceiling to break. May not seem like it to somebody of a younger generation, but for my generation, I feel very inspired and motivated when I see somebody else doing things, because it makes me think I can do it too.
You can. And that's one of the things that you need to be mindful of, is that you're not going to know who's watching you, but there are other young girls that are watching. So it's important for you to go for it, because it will matter to others behind you that you'll never know their names, but they will have watched you. So thanks for mentioning that.
Thank you. What has challenged you the most in terms of your leadership as well as professional trajectory in higher education, and how did you tackle that challenge?
Well, it's interesting. And this is actually a very simple and quick answer. It's the people part, right? The people part is the most rewarding. It's the most inspiring. Touching thousands and thousands of students in such a positive way through higher education is such a gift, to have spent my entire career in that capacity. But the hardest part, the most challenging part of being a leader, of course, are also the people, and finding the strengths in people, and finding ways in which different strengths will need different environments so that they can be successful and they can thrive. Finding strengths in and purpose in those that their role is to be the antagonist, to give feedback that is, something they're passionate about, often can come off very, harsh, but, realizing that that's part of communities, it's part of families, it's the people part. And so how do you bring people together as teams? That can be a challenge. That's been something I've felt, maybe because of my discipline as a psychologist, I've been very successful at is building teams, because it's a team that makes the heavy lift work. I don't do all this work, right? It's my team that does it. And, you need to be very selfless about, what you take credit for, because the work is done by many, many others. So that people part is the hardest part, and also the most joyous part.
Ah, thank you. Thank you. So you actually answered the other question I had. So that allows me to move forward. I do want to quickly ask you, you did mention earlier today, before we hit the record button, that you will be retiring. So congratulations. And I hope that that next step or chapter in your life is equally as fulfilling. But before you retire, is there any initiative that you are launching or have in place that you further want to strengthen at CSU Bakersfield before you leave?
Well, I have loved every second being at Cal State Bakersfield. I knew it was a perfect fit. My husband and I wake up every day. We feel so grateful to have this appointment. What do we love about it? The people. We love this salt of the earth community, hardworking, kind, generous people that have supported me since the moment I've been here. But the thing that I am most focused on is the statistic that comes from the Public Policy Institute of California, and I'm on their higher ed advisory council. And that statistic is, by 2030, the state of California will be 1.1 million university degrees short of this state's needs to continue as the golden state of this United States. So I am very focused on an initiative that is called the Better Bakersfield Boundless Kern Workforce Development Plan. It's an inclusive workforce development plan that was paid for by the governor and conducted by the Brookings Institute. And what it has defined is a way forward for Cal State Bakersfield and other constituencies to work together to bring about 100,000
Wow.
good paying quality jobs, living wage, with insurance for families. And that will be done in 10 years. I take seriously the role and the responsibility of Cal State Bakersfield in making sure that I'm aligning our curriculum to what we've identified as the areas where those high quality, good paying jobs will be. So that I do my part for the state of California, because the state of California cannot do it without the Central Valley. So
Yes.
such a privilege to be in my role now, and I've got my foot on the gas. And Cal State Bakersfield is actually responsible for measuring the metrics on this. And since we began a year ago, the metrics have already ticked up. So we know that at Cal State Bakersfield, our niche is energy, which is why we were able to get the Energy Innovation Building as an appropriation from the governor. We have the unique geology in Kern County for carbon management, which is why we will be one of the only CSUs to have a partnership with the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. That will be celebrated here in a month. And we're not letting up here. I've got 6 months until my retirement, and I'm eager to start that next chapter and continue serving as an executive leadership coach for women and staying involved in supporting new presidents in the CSU and
Wow.
using my skills to support successful leadership for the state. But those are areas that I'm passionate about. I am proud of the work that we've initiated, and I am proud also to hand this over to the leadership. It'll all be buttoned up, and it's all strategically aligned. And also, we need to keep our focus and continue to hire talented faculty in these areas to build curriculum where the workforce will need it in the future.
That is quite an initiative and a legacy. And it goes back to the heart of the matter, which is putting the human at the center, creating these jobs, creating the initiatives that not only help the Central Valley and Bakersfield, but they're also helping people to have a living wage and insurance. I don't know what broader goals you can have beyond being an instrument of service in that capacity. I want to say thank you. And in closing, I'd like to ask you, is there any advice that you may have for any current or rising leaders that you have found to be meaningful in your life, both in and out of the workplace?
Well, I have had amazing mentors along the way, and I have been so thankful for their support. So my one big tip would be, as you are developing on your leadership journey, do try to think about mentors. They can be mentors that are just ahead of you. They can be peer mentors. They could be formal mentors like an executive leadership coach, or they can be informal. I would also say it's really important that you know your strengths and you're able to articulate them. And if you don't know your strengths, ask someone who knows you, and they will easily be able to identify your strengths. And you need to build on those strengths. And you also need to listen to your heart. You need to listen to what is it that brings you joy day in and day out. And for me, one of the roles that I have, of course, most love, even beyond being a university president, is the role of mother. I'm so glad to have had that opportunity. But I use that also as a guidepost in my work in leadership. I lean back on it because I was a really strong mother, and there's times where I make people laugh, and I know I'm going to have to say some tough things, and I'll say, I'm going to have to go tough mom on you here. And people will laugh, but they're ready to hear what I have to say. So again, find ways of using your strengths and building them into transferable skills, and find joy and feel grateful every day.
Thank you, Lynnette. I am incredibly grateful for the time that you have given me and our listeners. There's so much to unpack. Thank you very much. It's been an honor and a pleasure having you on Presence. And to our audience, if there's something that stood out for you that you really enjoyed, please leave a comment and we'll read it at one of our future episodes. Until next time. Thank you for joining us on Presence. For more information on how you can create greater levels of impactful presence in your professional and personal life, visit www.cindyurrutia.com and follow me on social media. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. Feel free to post a comment and we'll read it on the show.